All right, good evening everybody. Hello. Thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate you coming in today. My name is Antonio Saravia. I'm a professor of economics and also the director of the new established Center for the Study of Economics and Liberty. This semester we started with a new center, and it is really a pleasure to kick off our activities hosting Professor Bryan Caplan from George Mason University. Yeah, round of applause. Thank you. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the professors that encourage the students to be here. I want to thank Students for Liberty for their support, for recording this presentation. Let me tell you a little bit about Bryan Caplan. As I said, professor of economics at George Mason University and blogger for Econ Law. He has written several books. One of them, The Myth of the Rational Voter, which was named the best political book of the year by the New York Times. He has also written Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids and The Case Against Education. His new book is the one that we're going to hear about today, called Open Borders, the Science and Ethics of Immigration. I have been lucky and got a copy already, read it in advance. It's coming out in October, isn't it? And I really enjoyed it. This book is assigned in my international economics class, so we're going to be discussing it. So yes, Open Borders, the Science and Ethics of Immigration, co-authored with Breakfast Cereal's Zach Withersmith. He also has a new project, a new book titled Poverty, Who to Blame. We had a session earlier this afternoon at 4, where he talked about that with a few of us. He has published in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Time, Newsweek, Atlantic, American Economic Review, the Economic Journal, the Journal of Law and Economics and Intelligence, and appear everywhere on ABC, BBC, Fox News, etc., etc. It is really a great pleasure to start activities of the Center for the Study of Economics and Liberty with Professor Bryan Caplan. So, help me welcome him.
Thank you very much for that kind invitation. So, yes, this is the new book coming out on October 29th. I assume everyone will want to actually buy it after the talk, but the book is actually much better than the talk because you can see all the pictures. Here I'm just going to show you some highlights. But let's get started. All right. The social value of labor mobility. All right. In free labor markets, workers tend to move from places where wages are low to places where wages are high. Like in the South, there was a big period where population was leaving the South to go to other higher wage areas of the country, going to the North, going to the West. All right, and they're the obvious beneficiaries of the workers themselves, right? So you're in a poor area of the country, you move to a rich area of the country, you get more money. But when workers move, they are not the only people who benefit from this act. Why? Because productivity and wages are usually closely linked. Right? Workers who earn low wages usually don't produce very much. Workers who earn high wages usually produce a lot. What this means is that when you move from a place where your wage is low to a place where your wage is high, you are moving from a place where you contribute little to society to a place where you contribute more to society. You also are increasing the amount of wealth that you produce for society. Right? I mean, it's really obvious if you're living in the center of Alaska somewhere. Right? And then what can you do? You can hunt caribou. But that's it. And then who even wants to buy your caribou in the center of Alaska? So when you're living there, you're very poor and you contribute very little to the world. If you then go and move over to Juneau, Alaska, and work on a fishing boat, then not only do you get a big raise, but then you contribute much more to the rest of society by going and producing the product people want, the fish in Alaska, and getting it to the customer. Right? And of course, this holds true for both high and low skilled workers. Yes, when high-skilled workers move from a place when they're paid relatively little to a place where they're paid more, this enriches them in society. But when low-skilled workers do this, same thing. All right. Now, this logic holds true across national borders. When workers move to earn higher wages, they also enrich the world. So think about being in Haiti right now. How much could you accomplish if you were born there? Like, we just paradrop you there. You're dropped there. We take away all your papers. The U.S. government does not recognize your existence. So all you can do is whatever the best job you can get in Haiti. Well, what is that job going to be? It's probably going to be a very low-paid job and a job that doesn't contribute very much to the world, one where you're not able to use most of your talents. On the other hand, if you were able to sneak back from Haiti into the US, then not only would you be able to get a much better job, but you would be able to contribute a lot more to the world than you would back there. You'd be able to use your skills, you'd be able to find your customers, and so on. Right, in my graphic novel, I've got a thought experiment. We're saying, imagine you've got 1 million farmers in Antarctica. Right, they're just barely surviving. They're farming the snow, just eking out the best existence they can in this desperate situation. And what do they contribute to the world economy in Antarctica? Nothing. They don't contribute anything. All they do is grow a little bit of food and they eat it so they can stay alive and do the same thing next year. All right, now what happens if those Antarcticans are allowed to move to another country where conditions for agriculture are better? Well, obviously the Antarcticans are better off. Right? They're going to be able to grow a lot more food, they're going to be able to eat better, live better, but they're not the only people to be better off. Right? Because when they move to another country, they're able to greatly increase their production, they grow a lot more food. They're not going to eat all that food. A lot of it they're going to sell to other people. And then those people, their customers, wind up benefiting because there's extra food. So it's not just the Antarcticans who benefit from being allowed to leave Antarctica and go to another country. Everyone who eats benefits from this. So then what is the point of immigration restrictions? What is the point of stopping people from moving from one country to another? Right? It really comes down to this. You want to stop economically beneficial movement from happening. There's someone who wants to leave Haiti to go and work in Miami. When he does this, he will not only have a better life for himself, he will contribute more to the world. And the point of the laws is to say, no, you aren't allowed to do that. That is illegal. Right. Now, do these immigration restrictions actually stop immigration? Right, I've occasionally heard people say, well, there's like 11 million illegal immigrants here, so obviously it doesn't make any difference. The laws are not really enforced. But this is actually completely crazy. This is about as good as saying laws against murder don't prevent murder because there's still 30,000 people got murdered last year. Right? No. That does not follow at all. Right? So how do we know that immigration laws actually do reduce immigration? Well, for one thing, we can take a look at how much money people get paid to get smuggled into the U.S. So the very cheapest rate would be Mexico, where you probably pay about $3,000 or $4,000 to get into the U.S. People usually pay $3,000 or $4,000 to do something that they can do for free. Not often, right? That would be very unusual behavior. And of course, for the workers that are coming, we're talking about 2 or 3 years worth of wages. So when you want to go and work for 2 or 3 years, when you can just cross the border easily? Yeah, of course not. And that's actually a really cheap smuggler's fee. If you're trying to get smuggled in from Asia, you might easily be paying $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 to get in. And even then, it's oftentimes you pay the money and it doesn't really work, and then it's dangerous. So clearly, with the very fact that people pay these rates just gives you an idea of how strict the enforcement is. If the enforcement was loose, people wouldn't pay very much in order to get smuggled in. Furthermore, there have been multiple surveys of the world finding out that hundreds of millions of people say they would like to move to another country. A lot of people just want to move to work for a while and then go home, and then there's plenty of other people who say, I just like to get out of Dodge and permanently move to another country. So immigration restrictions totally work in the sense that they reduce immigration a lot. If you see 11 million people here illegally, this probably gives you an idea that there could be 10 times, 20 times, 50 times as many people who would come if it were safe and cheap. So what do these restrictions accomplish? Here's the really big thing they accomplish. They impoverish mankind. They impoverish humanity. All right, so when economists have tried to figure out how much are we depressing the wealth of mankind by trapping so much talent in places where it accomplishes little, standard estimate says that if anyone could work anywhere, then the production of the world, we call global GDP, or technically it's GWP, gross world product, would double. All right, now that's a rough estimate. Maybe it would only go up by 50%, maybe it would go up by 150%. We're talking about the addition of many trillions of dollars a year of wealth for the world. Right? So there's a famous article on this that is subtitled $1 trillion bills on the sidewalk. If we would just go and hand out work visas like they were candy, we could increase the wealth of the world by many trillions of dollars per year. And again, how is this? You do it by taking labor that is accomplishing next to nothing and allowing it to move to a place where it could accomplish a lot. Right? Can that really work? It works right now. When you see someone move from a poor country to a rich country, overnight they can easily increase their earnings by a factor of 10. You can go from earning $5 a day in Haiti to earning $50 a day in the US. And is this because American employers are nice and Haitian employers are mean? No, it's because your productivity is so much higher here that competing employers are happy to pay you more because you deliver more here. All right, which brings us to the next point. Impoverishing the world impoverishes us. Right, so most people who analyze immigration policy ignore almost everything I just told you. Right, so if you ever heard what I just said before, I'm happy, but it's unusual. Right, so the arguments that people like to make about immigration, usually they are about, can't we just be nice? Can't we just be cool to desperate people? So there's that. Of course, then like, well, if it's charity, then how many people can we take care of? Right, it's a reasonable question. Right, even people who are pro-immigration and talk about its benefits, normally they focus on high-skilled immigration. People like to talk about, well, there's like Sergey Brin founding Google. You don't want him in our country? You're crazy. Yeah, it is crazy to not want Sergey Brin. Yeah, he did do great things. But that's not the argument I'm making. The argument I'm making applies for all workers, anyone who wants to move, low-skilled workers. I'm talking about janitors, nannies, maids, dish diggers. Right? All of these people are people who could accomplish a lot more and have a better life for themselves and contribute a lot more to the world if they would just be allowed to go and move from the country where they were born to a country where they would like to live. Right, now, every now and then, though, someone will acknowledge what I'm talking about. Right, it's not often, but every now and then someone will acknowledge it and say, all right, fine, but who cares? Who cares about doubling the production of the world? That's not important. I'm like, that's not important? What could be more important than doubling the production of the world? Sounds great, right? But they say, no, we don't worry about it because almost all these gains go to immigrants. They almost all go to foreigners. And we don't care about foreigners at all, do we? Well, I do care about foreigners, but anyway, beside the point. So they're like, what is actually the effect on the receiving country? So is this really just a big act of charity where you let in a bunch of foreigners, they're really better off, but it ruins your country, so it doesn't seem like a very good deal? Right now, this argument is really strange because we have a lot of other examples where there were large increases in production, and in no case were the primary beneficiaries of that increase in production the people in that exact industry. Right? Instead, big increases in production almost always ended up being broadly beneficial. So thinking about Uber. Right? I hope you have Uber here. You got Uber in Macon? It's not illegal. Is it legal? Yes. All right, good. All right, good. I don't care. All right. All right, yes. All right, so Uber. Are the main people who benefited from Uber the stockholders in Uber? Well, their company still hasn't made any profits. They haven't benefited yet. Are the main people who benefited the drivers? Well, they got something. But who are clearly the main beneficiaries of Uber? The customers. All the people that are getting cheap rides. College students who previously would have considered taking a taxi ride to be a ridiculous luxury and now say, it's not a big deal, it's just Uber. Or the internet. Are the main people who profited from the internet the computer programmers who set up the internet? Yeah, ridiculous. Almost everyone uses it. You usually pay next to nothing to use it, or a lot of times you pay nothing to use it, and used by billions of people. And then what share these gains to the actual people who created the internet get? It's just a tiny fraction. Or like antibiotics. The main beneficiaries of antibiotics, the scientists who invented the antibiotics, no, it's all the people who didn't die. It's all the people who don't stay sick for very long because of the antibiotics who are the main beneficiaries. Like tractors. The main beneficiaries of tractors, the tractor companies, or the farmers. The main beneficiaries of tractors are all of us who now have cheap food. Right? This is how it works. Or again, most obviously, the Industrial Revolution itself. The main beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution itself, the people who make the machines, it's all the people who have cheap clothes, cheap food, cheap houses, cheap stuff, cheap electronics. Right? So again, what's going on? When you have a large increase in production, the gains are almost always widely shared. Almost never do we see that they're primarily captured just by one narrow group of people. All right, now since immigration restrictions drastically reduce global production, they're almost surely impoverishing us too. Right, now you may have heard of trickle-down economics. Of course, this is an expression deliberately designed to be opposed. Right, so it's like, well, we do something really big and then a little bit trickles on us. Thanks a lot. So this is not trickle-down economics. It's what I call Niagara Falls economics. It's where you unleash trillions of gallons of water over the world and it gets wet. Right, and not just a little bit, the whole thing. And this brings us to the first page of what I'm going to show you the book. Yes, because if it wasn't clear, this is actually a non-fiction graphic novel. So, and what is that? So you know what a documentary is, right? So just picture a comic book, a documentary, and that's what I've done here. So here I am saying open borders isn't trickle-down economics, it's Niagara Falls economics, right? To illustrate the point. And by the way, why did I do this? Part of the reason is I think it's really cool, but I also have read enough of these to be convinced this is actually much more convincing and a better way of explaining what's going on. So, there's a cartoon history of the universe where if I were in charge of textbooks, I would replace all textbooks in the US for intro history with the cartoon history of the universe. Because it actually explains the history better, more compellingly, and more memorably by combining words and pictures to actually get through to people so they understand and remember what's going on. Right? Also, I like it because I can go down to much younger kids, and my 5-year-old was reading over my shoulder for this book. Whereas, she never read over my shoulder for an actual book in words. That was too boring. This she liked. All right, so buy it for all kids you know. It's important. All right, so what are we losing from immigration restrictions? We're losing tons of cheap products. So think about what you get when you go into Walmart or Costco, where you walk in and you see giant piles of stuff available dirt cheap, and just imagine you could have lots more of that. Lots more stuff like that. Right? We're losing tons of cheap services. So you think about Uber for everything. So think about whether the services that Uber now provides to you cheaply, whether you get similar things for childcare, for elder care, for cleaning, for cooking, all that stuff. Large increases in U.S. real estate values, right? Which of course was almost entirely beneficial for Americans because what is the nationality of the owner of almost all real estate in America? American. Americans own almost all real estate in the U.S., so when U.S. real estate values go up, Americans benefit from that. And if there is a large increase in population, then that means that real estate values go up. We are losing a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation, not all of which is high skill. But again, people like Sergey Brin, but how about the people who run the Afghan restaurant by my work? They're entrepreneurs too, they're innovating too, right? And we are losing that, right? We're losing a lot more of what we could have. Now, of course, people often talk about the effect on native wages and jobs. So here's the key thing. The effect of immigration on your wages and your jobs, all depends upon whether immigrants produce what you produce or produce what you consume. Right? So like when an Afghan restaurant opens up in my area, do I have to worry this is going to take my job or hurt my wages? No, of course not. In fact, this raises my wages because my money now buys more. Before it could buy all this other stuff, now it can buy all this other stuff, plus it can also buy Afghan food. All right, so anytime a new store that you like opens up, that effectively is giving you a raise. Right? Your real wage is higher. Okay. So on the other hand, when you let in foreign professors, especially foreign economics professors, then is that bad for me? Yeah, sure. It's devastating for me. It's terrible. Right, so that's why I'm not at Harvard. Right? If we just kept that, if only native-born Americans could teach in U.S. universities, then I can have my job at Harvard, right? Maybe not. All right. So anyway, what should we think about this? Well, we should always focus on the net effect. So when people are complaining, they'll tend to go and find the very specific thing to complain about, right? Which you can do, right? If you have any friends like this who always find the one negative thing in their lives and then they complain about that, and you may not want to be friends with them because it gets tiresome. Or if you want to keep your friends, don't do this, right? Try to be positive. Be a positive person. All right, anyway, you always should focus on the net effect. So immigrant professors are bad for me, but immigrants overall are good for me because I get not only the competition in my job, but I get all of the competition for my money that I get from every other kind of immigrant. Which brings me, by the way, to the most important principle of economics, and it is this. The secret of mass consumption is mass production. So whenever you are trying to figure out any kind of a complicated economic situation, the thing you should always do is say, what was the effect on production? Did this increase the production of mankind? If so, then this is something that is enriching mankind and is overall a good thing. Right? On the other hand, if it's reducing production, then reverse rule applies. This is something that's impoverishing mankind. It's a bad thing. So when you see that immigration is increasing total production, and then you see, well, there's some gains for me, some losses, the thing to fall back on is what happened to production overall. Right? Or sometimes we'll also say, always keep your eye on production because that is the crucial thing to consider. The key difference between countries that are rich and poor: countries that are rich produce lots of stuff. Countries that are poor do not. Okay. Now, if you think that Americans should get even more from immigrants, the prudent policy then is to welcome them, but to say, sorry, we're going to hit you up. Right? So there's an admission fee to come into the U.S., or there's a surtax, or both. Right? I'm not advocating it, just pointing out if you do want to squeeze immigrants for an even larger share, there are ways of doing this. Right? And then if you're worried, well, I'm just worried about some natives who lost out. People often talk about American native high school dropouts. Right, fine, you can go and tax immigrants extra and then use the money to go and help out the natives who lost. All right, so why not? Why not go ahead and do this? All right, well, let me just be the first one to say, estimates of massive economic gains rarely change people's minds about immigration. In fact, I should probably say immigration increases wealth world by 100 trillion, 100 billion, 100 million, 100 quadrillion, and most people would not even be paying attention to what exact letter is in front of the illion, right? It's like billions, trillions, it's whatever. All right, so, a lot of this is just enumeracy, and at some level, well, what can I really do about enumeracy? I can preach, be numerate, think in terms of math, right? I can say, 1 trillion minus 1 billion is approximately equal to what? It's approximately a trillion, right? So, if you've got a trillion, a billion is around in there, right? But anyway, the amount of people who do know the numbers, very rarely do they actually challenge the effect of global production. So what I'm telling you, though, it is not often discussed. Out of people who have thought about it, very rarely do they actually just say, I don't believe you. Instead, people usually will point to offsetting concerns. Right? And at the top of the list, we've got protecting U.S. taxpayers. So immigrants are coming to collect welfare and rip us off. We've got protecting U.S. culture. So immigrants are not going to learn English or will otherwise culturally harm us. And then there's also one of protecting U.S. liberty. Right, this is a great free country, and we don't want immigrants coming and voting to make us into Venezuela. Right, so now in the book I have a chapter on each of these complaints. So I take a lot of time and I try to go over it. And by the way, so as you might be able to tell from the cover of the book, this is not a normal political book. Normal political books try to get you to hate someone on the cover and talk about how evil other people are and how much they're liars and so on. I don't want to do that. I don't want to read books like that. I don't want to hear about that anymore. I have something positive to say. Saying we can do something that will make the world vastly better at less than zero cost to ourselves, so why not? All right, so why not? All right, so the protecting taxpayers protection. All right, so this begins with some simple facts, which says, look, the American welfare state pays more for idleness than many countries pay for work, and so immigrants come to abuse the system. All right, and first part's definitely true. You can get more on welfare in the U.S. than a lot of people on Earth can earn from working full-time or more than full-time. All right, and of course there are some people who abuse the system. True. All right, but there is a key fact about the U.S. welfare state, and it's this. Most of the money goes to the old and not the poor. Most of the money in the U.S. goes to the old, not the poor. So Social Security and Medicare are far bigger than TANF, SNAP, Medicaid. All right. And the upshot of all this is that since immigrants tend to be young, right, even poor ones generally will have a positive fiscal effect. So there's almost no serious research that finds a big negative fiscal effect of immigration. Now this is something where I'm talking in about detailed numbers, which are really boring to most people. And if you don't trust me, then you could just say, well, I know there's someone over in another place that will give you different numbers. So I'll say, like the numbers that I use in my book are from the National Academy of Sciences. This is generally considered by almost everyone discussing this to be the most authoritative, fair-minded report. I didn't just pick something that would agree with me, right? But furthermore, if you just want to understand, why is it not absurd? Why is it believable, at least, to think that immigrants could actually be net fiscal positive? And again, that means that they pay more in taxes over their lifetime than they use in services. First of all, remember, a lot of government spending is what economists call non-rival. Namely, the cost doesn't depend on population. Right? So imagine that we had a big baby boom. We got 10 million new babies. Would anyone say, well, we got all these new babies, we need to expand our nuclear stockpile to protect the babies? Would anyone say that? No, why? Because you realize, look, we can protect 10 million babies just as well with whatever nukes we had. We don't need any more. Right? And the same goes for a lot of things the government does. The cost doesn't depend on population. That means that when you let in another immigrant, they pay anything, they're actually reducing the burden on people that are already here. An even better example is the national debt. So whenever countries consider secession, they always discuss how will we divide up the national debt. So like if Scotland secedes from the UK, how will they divide up the debt of the national debt of the UK? And I know if I were a Scottish secessionist, I have a very simple answer to this. My answer is, does the debt say Scotland on it? Then Scotland's not paying any of it. And if Scotland could get that deal, secession would be fantastic for Scotland, because they wipe out their debt, they don't have to pay anything anymore. But then over in the rest of the UK, the debt gets shoved over on them. What does immigration do? It's basically like secession in reverse, where someone quits paying for the country's national debt, and they come over and help us pay with ours. All right, now, even if this complaint about taxpayers were true, there still is no good reason to keep people out. Instead, why not freely admit immigrants, but limit their eligibility for benefits? Say you can come, but there's going to be a waiting period if you want to get welfare. There's going to be a waiting period if you want to get public education, right? And again, for all of these things, of course, you could go with many different variants. You say you have to pay $100,000 in taxes to collect benefits. There's a waiting period, lots of possibilities, some of which are already used by the U.S. right now. Right? So right now, there's like a 5-year wait for a green card, during which time you're ineligible for most welfare benefits. But if you go over to Kuwait, say, then you're talking about at least a 30-year wait. Right? So you do that instead. Right now, you may say, well, isn't that cruel? Well, it's a lot less cruel than saying you can't come at all. If you picture going to Haiti and saying, all right, you all come to the U.S., you can all work, but sorry, no welfare. Right? How many of them are going to say, well, then forget that, I'm not coming? Right? So not many, right? Because it's still a big improvement for them. There is protecting American culture. All right, now this is one where I'll admit it's hard to know exactly what American culture is or what the harm to it might be. And if someone isn't specific, then it's hard to say that their fears are incorrect. We can start with one of the most common cultural complaints, and this is just saying immigrants don't learn English. All right, so what does the data say? It says that over 90% of second-generation Mexicans, which is a group that we think of as not learning English, actually do speak fluent English. And the real story is that first-generation immigrants today generally do not acquire fluent English if they come as adults, but this has always been true. Right? So back in the days of Ellis Island, first-generation immigrants then also generally did not acquire fluent English. It is the kids that acquire fluent English, right? But it doesn't seem like it was a problem then, not clear why it should be a problem today. Then there is a whole social science literature on trust. We can talk about that in the QA if you're curious. But a more general point, so there's a guy named Mark Kukurian who runs the Center for Immigration Studies, which is the highest profile anti-immigration think tank in the country. And I've debated him several times, and he says, look, immigration is like donuts, Brian. It's like donuts. It's like, look, it's like donuts. Well, look, when you're a teenager, you can stuff your face with all the donuts you want, and it doesn't cause any harm. But if you keep stuffing your face with donuts when you're 50, you're going to be morbidly obese. He said immigration is just the same way. Back in the 19th century, we could stuff our face with immigrants, and it was fine. But now, if we bring in immigrants, we're going to be morbidly obese, and it's going to stick in our country, and something bad's going to happen. Right? So he says times change, conditions are different. Right? And he's actually right about that. Times change, conditions are different. However, culturally, actually, the case for immigration is much better now than it was 100 years ago. Why? Well, 100 years ago, if you have a Sicilian peasant coming into Ellis Island, what are the odds that he speaks English? Like near zero. He doesn't even speak normal Italian. He speaks a strange dialect of his village in Sicily. What does he know about the modern economy, modern technology? He's probably hasn't done anything more complicated than hitch a plow to a donkey. All right? And so back then, there was a much bigger problem with assimilation, of bringing in people who really are very culturally distant from the U.S. Right? On the other hand, today, there's over 1 billion people who are not in English, in countries where English is the first language who speak fluent English. There are over 1 billion people who are very familiar with what life is like in rich countries, even though they've never been there. They know about it from television, from movies, from the internet. Right? So a great deal of the world is already what I call pre-assimilated. They're already ready to hit the ground running. They already understand language, culture, and so much more. Right? All they don't have is the piece of paper to get in. Right. Now, furthermore, even if complaint were true, even if you were concerned about cultural effects, so why not just say that? Okay, you can come in if you pass an English fluency exam. So it's not just language, it's also something else, right? Fine. then you can come in if you pass a cultural literacy test. All right, so like whatever it is that is the exact problem, why not narrowly tailor a solution to that so that we can still realize the enormous gains of letting people move from places where their labor is unproductive to places where it's productive. And here is another one of my pages from the book. So I often argue with people say, like, Bryan, you're crazy because you think there's magic dirt. You think you just take an immigrant, plop them here, and the dirt transforms someone who's only herded goats into a modern American citizen. I say, that's not what I think. What I do believe in is not magic dirt, it's magic culture. It's magic culture. So you can take someone from a very poor country, move to the US, and they can acculturate enough to become productive members of society, and then their kids can finish the job and acculturate entirely. So there you have me. If you take a look, that's a little baptismal scene. That's a patriotic baptism. Uncle Sam is baptizing a baby. Right? And so culture takes centuries to spread by persuasion, but only one generation is spread by immersion. Right? Or at least that's how it seems to me. So could I be wrong? Right? Of course, in the book, I go over this. This is a book where I really did try very hard to listen to all the complaints and try to take them seriously. So, of course, you can give me money and then decide whether I did a good job. But all right, and then finally we got Protecting American Liberty. So this is an excuse that's very popular among conservatives as well as libertarians. Right? So it says, look, all right, this all sounds really good, but you're forgetting one thing. Right? Immigrants come from statist countries. They come from socialist hellholes. And what are they going to do when they get here? They're going to vote to turn our country into a socialist hellhole too. All right. So anyway, this is one where it's kind of frustrating because there's a lot of people saying this, but there's almost very little research. So I had to spend quite a bit of time doing the research that should have been done by the people making the arguments. But here's what I found. All right. So the minimum is that the problem is greatly overstated. So one thing is non-natives just have low turnout, right? Even controlling for other factors. So if you're worried about how they're going to vote, you should remember, well, they don't vote much at all. So they really just are not very interested in the politics of the country they go to. So whatever their views are not really going to be very important for politicians who are trying to win office. Furthermore, there's also interesting evidence that the immigrants reduce native support for the welfare state because people don't like helping out groups. It's like back in the old days when almost everyone in Scandinavia was blonde, they had some of the biggest welfare states, probably the biggest welfare states that have never been known to man. And during this time, there's very strong popular support for these welfare states, much along the lines of, let's see, there's my Swedish accent. Surely you don't think that another blonde person would go and try to rip off Sweden? All right, and of course not, he's blonde, he wouldn't do such a thing. All right, so that was their attitude back then. Right, and when they started letting in a lot more immigrants, it seems like it really did undermine support and their welfare state did shrink. Right. And again, why? Well, it's when you see people in out-group coming, you interpret their motives much less charitably. Right? My view is they're probably unreasonably forgiving of blonde people before. And there's people who rip off the system regardless of their nationality. Just because they look like you doesn't mean that they aren't going to game the system. Right? In any case, it seemed like this led to not an elimination of the Scandinavian welfare state by any means, but rather a downsizing of it in response to some realistic concerns about how maybe there's going to be some abuse now, so we should actually put some limits on this. Now, this research is usually done by people who really like the welfare state and also like immigration, and then they feel really bad. It's like, well, on the one hand, the welfare state's great, on the other hand, immigration's great, but we can't really have both. Which one are we going to cave in on? And normally they cave in on immigration. On the other hand, if you're worried about immigrants going and voting for a Swedish-style welfare state, then this is actually their presence seems to be one of the main things that keeps you from having it. Now finally, even if the complaint were true, why not just admit immigrants to work and live, but not to vote? So you're welcome to come here, you live here, you work here, that's all great, but you don't get to vote. Because we're worried about you messing things up. All right. And now we come from science ethics. So if mainstream social science is even roughly correct. And by the way, so in this book, I claim that I am not telling you something weird. I'm not just telling you something that me and my three friends believe. I'm going to mainstream social science research on these questions, and I am trying to accurately and fairly report what normal people researching this say. My conclusion is unusual, right? But I say it's not because I am making up new facts or even purporting to find new facts. What I'm doing is snapping together research from other people and saying, when you put it all together, it gives you a very different picture from what most people think. All right. Anyway, I say if mainstream social science is even roughly correct, all leading moral theories seem to require open borders. All right, so let's see. How many people here have ever taken a philosophy class or anything like that? All right, pretty good number. All right, let's just go through them real quickly. So, utilitarianism, maximize the sum of human happiness. All right, well, when you leave a large increase in human production and many of the gains go to people desperately poor, that is almost the definition of something that is going to pass this utilitarian test. All right, then you got egalitarianism, saying that human equality is really important. All right, well, what could be more unequal than saying that just because you're born in Haiti, you are stuck in Haiti for the rest of your life? And it is illegal for you to go and get a job in the U.S., right? Is it really a fair description? Well, how hard would it be for the typical Haitian to legally come to the U.S.? Right? And the answer is, unless you have close relatives in the U.S., you'll die before you get in. Right? The system just is set up to say no, not to say yes. Right? Then, of course, there is libertarianism. Right, saying government should, at minimum, there's a presumption against government, government regulation, government taking action that reduces people's freedom. All right, well, this seems like a really large reduction of human freedom to say you're not even allowed to move from Haiti to get a job. Right, so every now and then there are libertarians who say, well, this is our country, we own it, we can do what we want here. So yeah, that's actually the opposite of libertarianism. Right, because if that's true, then the majority gets to decide what you can do. And so what are all these complaints you have about the majority oppressing you? It's their country, they can decide. All right, or not. All right, then of course there's economic efficiency. Very hard to turn away trillions of dollars a gain in the name of economic efficiency. There's no one yet. Meritocracy, just saying like the best person for the job. Well, what immigration laws are all about saying that there's affirmative action for native-born citizens. And you can't hire the best person, you have to hire the best person that is approved by the government. And how is that fair? And finally, there is a very old philosophical belief system, you may have even heard of it, called Christianity. Since it's vacant, there may even be earnest believers in it. All right, so in my book, I've got a little panel saying, who would Jesus deport? Who would Jesus deport? It doesn't seem like he would deport people. All right, so very little in the Bible about all that counts for the people in our country, other human beings, forget them. Instead, there's a great deal about the brotherhood and sisterhood of mankind, and that there are moral obligations that you have to people all over the world. Right now, again, why not just give them money? Why not just foreign aid? Why do they have to let them immigrate here? Well, foreign aid is nowhere near the gain that you can get from just letting people move and take care of themselves. And so why make people live on some scratchy charity when they're perfectly able to just come here and get a job? Right. And finally, there is another philosophy that doesn't have a lot of high-status spokespeople, but in philosophy, but there are many people who will say it. Sometimes called citizenism, and it just says, look, what we should do is whatever is best for our country. Right? Whatever is best for our country is exactly what we should do. So even if this is your view, it still recommends open borders combined with pro-native taxes and transfers. So yeah, you can come in here, but the immigrants pay our taxes, and we're going to use those taxes to fund transfers to go and help out Americans who lose. Right? So even there isn't really much of an argument against it. All right. Now, I should say, many people will ask me about Donald Trump, and I say, look, he's very good for business because he keeps talking about a view that hardly anyone holds: open borders. Right? So all of you open borders people, there are almost no open borders people. Right? Of course, by the end of the day, there'll be many more. Right? But there are almost none. So it is not true that the Democratic Party favors open borders. That is a totally unfair statement. A fair statement, I think, would be they favor amnesty for people who are already here and maybe a little bit more immigration. Right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about amnesty for everyone who's here, plus opening up the doors and say, we want you. Right? This is not just we're going to be humanitarians, but rather, we got 5 minutes? Or, okay. No problem. All right, so, let's see. Something that's very different from that. But in any case, so I'm always happy to get undeserved publicity. Right, so the view that I'm pushing is not one that actually has many advocates. Every now and then I've been on a radio show with 3 proponents of open borders. I remember I was on one where there's a woman who said, now, of course, we're not talking about just letting anybody in. And I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the one thing I'm talking about here, actually. Eventually, a lot of other stuff is completely irrelevant, and I'm like, oh God, I hope people aren't listening to this because they're getting the wrong idea. Open borders is precisely about saying that we should have radical deregulation so that anyone on Earth can live and work any country where they want. Right? So now, all kidding aside, I don't expect to change people's minds in just one short talk. Right? So why bother giving it? Right? And here's my reason. What I really want to accomplish is to convince you that I'm not crazy. If I could do that. Right? It's an idea that I will say sounds crazy to almost everyone. And if at the end of this hour, you can say, he's wrong, but he's not crazy, I'll consider that to be a great triumph. And if it goes one step forward and says, oh, maybe I'll buy his non-crazy book and give him some more time to see what he really has to say, that would be very gratifying. So thanks a lot. Now we'll do Q&A. I'm testing.
All right, any questions for Dr. Caplan? Please.
I really liked a lot of your points, but one thing that I was kind of thinking of is with the rise of automation in America and how it's going to get worse and worse over the next 10 or 15 years, do you think that the combination of open borders would end up increasing our rise in automation because there's more jobs, so more incentives to automate those jobs?
So on automation, remember that thing I was saying about the secret of mass consumption is mass production and always keep your eyes on production? So I wish you were right, because automation is fantastic. It's because of the automation we've had that we've had such a rise in living standards. Unfortunately, I just think it's not true. So if you go look at data, look at the data. Okay, so anyway, when you look at the data, it seems like the golden age of automation was like the 20s to around 1970. This is the main period when automation was happening really quickly in the US. Since then, it slowed down a lot, and there's very little sign that the aggregate has actually sped up in the last 10 years or 20 years. We have a few dramatic examples that get newspaper headlines, but that's not a good way to find out what's happening to the world. Right? Unfortunately, I wish we were having really rapid automation, because this would mean that we'd be moving towards a cornucopian utopia very quickly. But anyway, so why not worry about automation? Right, the basic answer is, of course, it's increasing human production, and so that is increasing mankind. Right, and whenever we automate something, we just figure out something else for people to do. This has always worked, without exception. Right, so when we figured out how to automate agriculture, what did we do? Well, I guess we started, fine, let's go and do manufacturing. And we figured out how to get that really automated. What do we do? Well, services. And then we've automated some services. What do? We switch into other services. So, the basic point, human wants are unlimited. And whatever technology you come up with, there's always going to be something else that human beings can do. And by the way, this time it's different. Well, I actually had a bet on this. During the last recession, there were a bunch of people saying, oh, this recession isn't like other recessions. This is an automation recession, and this is like the beginning of the end for jobs. Right, so anyway, I had a colleague that was, he knew everything I knew, but he said, Brian, this time it's different. And I said, no, it's not. It's never been different. It's not different again. And we had a bet. So he actually bet me that unemployment would stay above 5% for the next 20 years. And he lost in about 3 years. Right, so, yeah, I wish there was a lot of automation, but because the automation's good, and it's it is one of the best things that can happen to us, but unfortunately it seems like it's actually going pretty slowly. So it's still happening, but it's slow.
Before I take the next question, there are sign-in sheets going on this side, one in the middle, and one there. Make sure that you write your name and your professor. There you go. So you can get your extra credit. Yes, go ahead.
If we start bringing in immigrants, wouldn't that oversaturate the job market and create more unemployment?
All right, so unemployment. You might think so, but economies like the U.S. have shown that they can absorb enormous numbers of workers without higher unemployment, at least over the medium to long run. The most obvious case is the entry of women into the workforce. So we're talking about close to 100 million new workers entered the workforce in the U.S. from the 50s up to the 90s. And if you try to find this in unemployment data, you don't see it. What's going on? Well, again, human wants are unlimited, so when new workers become available, businesses figure out something to do with them, and then the new stuff that they produce gets consumed by other people, and problem solved. In the very short run, maybe. right? So, if you let in 100 million people in a year, then I wouldn't be surprised if unemployment went up then. Right? So, again, probably one of the best examples of this is Israel got an enormous number of immigrants relative to its population from the Soviet Union. So, like 10 years, their population went up like 30%. And there was a brief period when unemployment went up a few percentage points and then went down. So, as long as your labor markets are functioning tolerably well, then more people just means that employers create more jobs and do more things, and it's fine.
Yeah. I think that your points are very insightful, and I really appreciate all the information and data you've collected. I think that we all should seek prosperity in our countries, especially because I have a background as an immigrant myself. Several of my questions include the effects on wages. So currently we've seen, since the Reagan administration, we've seen that prices, inflation has actually increased while wages have stagnated. And my question is, if we introduce, let's say 500 million new people into the job market in America, which is considered to be a common, would be considered a common market for this, we would see that the question would, could we see that the wages would fall to such an extent that the purchasing power of citizens would become so low that your idea of production and consumption and all that would completely wreck the delicate economic system that we've built up? And secondly, my question is, as a repercussion to this, because I am actually an immigrant, I've spoken to people from Morocco, I've spoken to people from Romania, and my main question is, what usually happens is that the people who can afford to move into these countries come in. So people like doctors, lawyers come in, and that actually causes, as a repercussion of that, a brain drain in those economies, meanwhile causing those industries in the U.S. to become overinflated, and the wages cause them to be lower. So, and for example, with Israel is interesting, and I'll definitely look into that. But that presupposes that markets actually are the same. I'll give you an example.
I think two questions is enough. You have both very good questions. So, on the brain drain question, here's the key thing. Right now, it is much easier for a high school immigrant to legally come to the U.S. You can get in legally with some luck and some effort. Doctors can get in, computer scientists can get in. If you're a janitor or a dish digger or a maid, it's very hard to get in legally. So what I'd say is, the brain drain that we've seen is almost entirely caused by regulation, because the actual cost of a plane ticket for someone from Morocco or Romania is a few months' wages at most. Right, so without the regulation, they would already be here, and so these problems we wouldn't have to deal with these problems. So so I actually do have a panel in the book saying where there's a little brain on the brain, a little brain figure saying, don't blame me, don't blame immigration, blame regulation. It is immigration regulation, it is a restriction of immigration that leads to this brain drain problem. Otherwise, people with all skill levels could come. Now, on the question of the effect on wages, so really complicated question. So actually, I think what you meant is that real wages have fallen rather that wages have fallen and inflation has increased. Inflation is lower, so the price level has increased. But anyway, that's you're worried about derivatives. But anyway, what I'd say is so one thing is all that works wrong, and particularly people who actually are working with modern price indices will say that this is just an illusion caused by using the wrong price index, and we are vastly richer than we were in the 80s. And since I remember the 80s, I can tell you that data is totally true. If you think that people today are not living at a much higher standard of living than they were 30 years ago in the US, this is crazy. Right? So, but that of course does not answer the real question, what would the effect of immigration on wages be? And the answer is, immigrants increase labor supply, but they also increase labor demand. And so the actual effects is not clear. Right? So often people just want to say, well, supply and demand, increase the supply of workers, wages go down. Yeah, but what if you also increase demand at the same time, which is what you do when you let immigrants in? Then it's not clear. Then you have to do empirical work. And say the highest quality empirical work says that Americans have gained in their wages as well as other ways from immigrants. So you can remember, when immigrants come and produce stuff that you like, they are giving you a raise, effectively. right? Because it means that whatever salary you're getting before buys more stuff than it did before those immigrants came and started producing what they produce.
Let's take one more there. Okay, two more, yes?
So how would you address the security concerns and the documentation concerns of having open borders? Because I like the idea, but you still have to think about documenting the people.
Right, so, first thing I would say is we should get a realistic view of how big the security threat is. All right, so I've got a few pages on terrorism in the book, because this is probably the thing that has prevented more immigration than anything else is terrorist attacks. When you look at the numbers, here's the thing about terrorism. It is crazy to worry about terrorism very much. Right, so just less than 1% of all deaths come from murder. Terrorism is less than 1% of all deaths from murder, so it is one of the smallest risks in the world. Right, so again, it's not to say you shouldn't worry about it all, but rather it's important to put it in perspective and say, look, should you worry more about drowning in a bathtub or being killed by terrorists? You should worry more about drowning in a bathtub. All right, so once you've got that idea of just putting in perspective, then I think it does give you an idea of how seriously should we take this. So to me, the main thing I'd say is bad about terrorism is just it creates a rationale for other bad policies. So, are there other things that can be done? Of course, there's obvious things of just profiling and saying, look, there's people from countries that statistically have never had terrorists and we're not worried about them. So you can do that. There are, of course, background checks. Is there any way to be absolutely certain? No. Is there any way to be absolutely certain about anything important? No. So that's life. Do I know that I'm going to survive till tomorrow? I don't. Do I know I won't die driving to the airport tomorrow? I don't. What's important is to have a realistic idea of the probabilities and reasonable precautions. So, reasonable precaution is for me to put on my seatbelt. It's not reasonable precaution to stay home and not come and talk to you. So that's my main thing I would say.
Take our last one again, please.
I'm just wondering if you see any limits on this. In other words, it sounds like you're kind of saying the more the better always. And so, should we go out to countries all over the world and give them incentives to come here? Because the more people who come here, the better it would be.
Right. So, if you go back to that standard labor mobility thing I was saying, basically, if a person is neither subsidized nor taxed, then you get the sufficient result when they come, if and only if the gains the total gains to the world exceed the total costs. So, although, like I said, out of all the government programs that I can think about, just one to subsidize low, bus tickets and steerage passage for the global poor, that sounds like one of the best uses of government money I can think of. In terms of, sort of more seriously, the questions of how much would it get before you'd be afraid? If 1 billion people came tomorrow, would I be afraid? Actually, I would be. Right? 1 billion people would come in one day. That's something where there would be starvation because we wouldn't be ready, we wouldn't have the food, there wouldn't be time to go and increase the amount of food production. So in that science fiction scenario, then I would be extremely worried. I think it would be a disaster. However, in the real world, 1 billion people don't come overnight. Right? Normally what happens is it starts off with a trickle and then gradually builds and builds. And so there's plenty of time to get ready and to prepare for people as they're arriving. So again, the example that I talk about in the book is Puerto Rico. So since 1902, there have been open borders between Puerto Rico and the U.S. Right now, when the border was first opened by the Supreme Court in 1902, there were only a few thousand Puerto Ricans came in the next few years. But it built and built and built, and now over half of all people of Puerto Rican descent live in the U.S. So it took 100 years, but we got an enormous number of people here. And by the way, on brain drain, you go to Puerto Rico, and despite the hurricane, it's still close to the richest place in the Caribbean. So it sure seems like it did not hurt them either to have this. But yeah, so in principle, if there were an enormous number happening very quickly, I'd be worried. Just don't think that is a realistic scenario. In terms of any other case I'd be worried, there are rare scenarios where you have to worry about civil war. So you have a whole lot of people from one country, and they move to another country, and the two groups are very hostile to each other, and it happens in a short time, then I'd be worried about civil war. And there are a couple of cases where that happened. Generally, though, only for low population countries. Right?
Not worried about environmental problems.
Yes, our environmental problems. So, let's see, do we have time?
No.
Or, no, right. Yeah, so, let's see. Here's what I say about environmental problems. So there's a whole field called environmental economics, which I think gives the right framework for thinking about the environment. And it's one that says that There are some human activities that have negative externalities on the environment, and there are also ways that we can change incentives in order to handle these problems cheaply. All right. What you generally do not get out of this is people saying we don't want to have economic growth because that'll be bad for the environment. First of all, of course, because keeping people to keep trapped in poverty for the sake of environmental equality is the kind of thing that makes you worry, wow, well, seems like the cure is worse than the disease, perhaps. But anyway, more importantly, there are just much cheaper ways of dealing with problems than keeping people out. So yeah, so if you're worried about more pollution from immigrants, tax pollution. Right? That's a really obvious thing you can do. It's something that has been tried and it does work well. Right? So that's the kind of thing that I focus on. Again, like I was saying, like for any problem, try to come up with the narrowest solution that addresses the problem rather than just trying to keep people away, which again has just enormous costs and is such a great missed opportunity.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think,